were developed were not even actual cases. What that can mean for someone, especially from a group that's already marginalized, overly policed, overly surveilled, can be extremely harmful. There are also examples of judges who have been using ChatGPT to help determine what type of decisions that they will make in the penalty phase. There's also on the side medical doctors who are using ChatGPT now to try to understand how they can better serve patients. But when you're using something, and all of these individuals are people without tech backgrounds, so they don't understand that this data is being fed in from any and everywhere, and there's no sort of decision making or determination whether this is valid or not, or whether it's harmful or not. And when we do that, we continue to exacerbate all of the biases that are already present in society. So criminal justice is already an issue. Healthcare is already an issue for so many marginalized groups. And by not understanding how justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion operate in technology, all we're doing is recreating tools that are further harming people and further pushing those same identities to the margins in ways that right now are even moving into life-threatening and even more harmful, life-ending. But in 10 to 20 to 30 years, we will see it actually push even more and accelerate.
We're at the beginning conversations around training data sets and bias, and how can we have a sort of a justice-oriented position towards AI that is not just focusing on the harm, but also asking other critical questions, which is opening up this space. So I think this foundational approach to computing and really connecting it to community, connecting it to power, becomes a really important understanding for students as they're having these conversations. There's no doubt kids are already using ChatGPT and other AI technologies in their other courses, and probably in computer science too. But just like other tools, the Google search engine, it's having questions and understanding the context and what it can do, what it can't do, what we should be most worried about, what we should, and maybe even for our students, how they might want to participate in AI as it continues to develop. So instead of AI being done by other people and students being the recipients, how can we give them enough knowledge and critical dispositions so they can see themselves as people who are the next creators of AI in a socially just type way?
Welcome, everyone. We are excited to have you here today. This is an exciting time for us because we get to spotlight some of the work that has been done by a very large part of the AiiCE community, which includes our Cultural Competence and Computing Fellows, or 3C Fellows. I am Nikki Washington, one of the leads on this research project, which is the Cultural Competence and Computing Fellows program. A little bit about that program for those who may not be familiar. We started this initiative, myself, Cicely Sadler, and Shawnee Daly, in the fall of 2020, with the idea of centering people, policies, and practices, providing closed space for learning as well as unlearning for faculty, future faculty, and staff, building a community of practice, and ensuring a demonstrable result of participation via a deliverable in some way, an identity-inclusive course module in an existing course, or other activity. And what we've seen across the 3 cohorts that are completing this in their year 2 or fully completed this program to date is some amazing work that's happening at institutions across K through 16. And so today, what we want to do is give place and space for those individuals who have done the work of this 2-year professional development program to really be able to spotlight what they've done. What you'll see today are lightning talks from 3C Fellows across 3 cohorts, which span 6 organizations across K through 16. They all have done amazing work. And then on the latter half of that, we're going to have a moderated discussion and Q&A by Cicely Sadler. And I want to give a little highlight and shout out to Cicely, who started this work as a graduate student with us and is now a PhD student at MIT. But Cicely, like I said, is a PhD student at MIT in the MIT Media Lab with a lifelong kindergarten group. Her interests lie at the intersection of computing and education, designing equitable learning environments that emphasize technology-mediated, project-based, community-oriented work. She focuses on investigating how computing can be leveraged to create spaces for Black and Brown youth to practice agency and develop their critical consciousness, identity, and voice through joyful learning experiences. Cicely is a graduate of North Carolina State University and Duke University, earning her BS and MS in computer engineering. She is also a member of the the 3C Fellows program, and also serves as a senior personnel in the Alliance for Identity Inclusive Computing Education, which is AiiCE. What you will hear from now are all of our 3C fellows, followed by the moderated Q&A discussion. So with that, I will turn it over to our first fellow, who is Keithan Kleiner.
Thank you. Yes, I'm so excited to be here. I completed my 3C fellowship capstone project as an instructor of computer science at a specialized STEM high school. Next slide. So there are sort of two parts to my project. The first I actually carried out as part of a summer research experience for teachers, where I worked with both staff at NC State as well as with high schoolers. And what we did is we kind of discovered and adapted curriculum from the University of Texas at Austin for AP Computer Science A. They had a great socially relevant they had a great socially relevant curriculum, and we wanted to see if we could kind of create a similar curriculum to be culturally responsive instead. All of the unit projects created for this, we created both teacher's guides and student guides. They all included scaffolding and extensions. And then I took our work and presented it to the other faculty at the school in my department for both engineering and computer science. As part of this, I not just presented the unit projects, but I also explained to my colleagues the difference between socially relevant, culturally relevant, and culturally responsive curriculum. Next slide. So this is a breakdown of the original curriculum that we found and were able to adapt. The students are kind of taken on this journey as scientists trying to solve a mystery, and it takes them all over the globe, completing different tasks, right, in order to demonstrate their proficiency and get practice, right, with the various computer science concepts. This curriculum took students all the way through the AP Computer Science A curriculum. Everything was covered. And so we modeled our curriculum off of that. Next slide. And so our curriculum, then, we really tried to lean more into culturally responsive. So we wanted to make sure that students really had the opportunity to include their own backgrounds and experiences in these unit projects, and not just necessarily analyze or do something with something that we gave them, right? So we have things like including their favorite movies or including a recipe that they like. We looked at the virality of tweets and how that's affected by author demographic. We analyzed demographic data. The most inventive one you'll see here was for inheritance. It was categorizing and applying and reapplying makeup. And this is something that all the students in the course would need to complete, and they would need to not just learn about inheritance, but also necessarily learn about different types of makeup as they complete it. So as a reminder, right, so I both developed this curriculum, and then the real project was presenting this to my colleagues in the department. And afterwards, we had a great discussion afterwards for what kind of projects or things they could do in their own courses, kind of along this same vein. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Luis Morales Navarro, and I work with K3 Jayathurtha, and we'll talk a little bit about bringing in the things that we learn in the 3C Fellows program to work with teachers in reimagining a curriculum. We worked on kind of creating a sequence of readings that we could use with exploring computer science teachers to create and reimagine a version of the Exploring Computer Science curriculum, which is an inquiry-based, equity-focused curriculum that stemmed out of Jane Margoliouth's research on racial and gender access to, like, racialized and gendered access to computing, and it's a curriculum that is implemented across the country. And where teachers play a really important role as co-designers as well as trainers of each other, where there's like a very strong community with teachers. What we did, if we can go to the next slide, is we created kind of a list of different topics that we wanted to explore with teachers, and then conducted co-design sessions. And these teachers that we worked with were teachers that had a lot of experience as teacher facilitators and also as teacher trainers. So they had been involved in professional development sessions with other teachers. And now Gayatri will tell us about how that went.
So this was in the year summer 2021, when we actually approached the teacher facilitators of AiiCE to be a part of the co-design work. For 12 of whom volunteered to be a part of this. I think some parts were missing here in the slide, and I think that's what threw off Louis and I. So this was also taken up as a part of NSF projects. So we were able to also compensate the teachers for, of course, right, nowhere like equal, but honor their time and effort in being a part of these co-design sessions, where they discussed these different topics, just like 3C, right? Colonization, racism, gender and sexuality, and what it means to how we teach computing in our high school introductory classrooms. So just to give you an example, here are some of the overarching themes that came up at the end of these co-design sessions, where teachers started recognizing that it is important, very important and urgent that we start looking at these intersections across all the lessons in the unit, for example, or even think about intersectionality and identity themed topics at the end of the different units in the program. They also wanted to explicitly teach how certain technology innovations that solve problems also may not include everybody. So these were some of the big ideas that came up. The teachers are now currently taking them up. If we can go to the next slide, it points us at how this is an ongoing work. So we also met in person after we had those online co-design sessions, where teachers started concretizing for what this means in terms of lessons and activities that will go into classrooms. So you can see that two teachers, Dawn and Libiada, coming from two different parts of the country, thinking about these lessons. Teachers actually wrote different lessons, workshopped different ideas. They got feedback from one another. They established certain tools and methodologies and techniques that they can adopt moving forward to write these lessons. They have discussed extensively at the intersections of different topics. As you can see in the illustrations there, in the middle, for example, colonialism and what that has got to do with computing, for where we get our hardware from, what it means for how we talk about hardware in our computing classrooms, for example. So this work is ongoing. Teachers are currently writing lessons as we are talking about it here today. But at the same time, we have been looking at the data that is coming out of this as a part of the NSF project. As we said, for example, there were some papers and presentations that were already a part of conferences such as AERA and CompEd, ACM CompEd conference. And there is more lined up as we are looking at data more closely. And of course, summer this year, we will be launching a revised version of some of these select units, where hopefully you will get to see more of these interesting lessons that teachers have come up with, which will interrogate at these intersections. Thank you so much for listening and time.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Lin. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm an Asian American a man. And I'm here to present my kind of a bit of a invited speaker talk that I am providing for anyone who's interested. So if you're interested, you can go to my website, kevinl.info, to learn more about the rest of this talk. And my talk is specifically on an invitation to reimagine, which is basically a new pedagogical approach that works not only in data structures courses, but really, I think, in any computing course. Next slide. So the first thing I want to talk about is a bit of kind of the work that I've been doing in data structures courses, and then we'll kind of see how this might extend to future work outside of and beyond data structures. So in 2021, I wrote a paper in the Respect Conference on developing a analytic method really for evaluating the affordances within abstractions. So within the programs we design, what are the methods that are available? What are the features that are available? And how might those have an intersection with the ways in which those features and methods might actually influence the design of future technologies? Then in 2022, I designed a pedagogy for data structures and algorithms around that method. In 2022, along with Alana, who's a researcher in the AiiCE school, we worked on this method called CIDR, iterative design, to be able to identify and address design assumptions. So kind of taking these three pieces together, I think of this as this approach of an invitation really to reimagine our computational problems and solutions. Next slide. And so the example I want to draw on is one that is not from any of that work, and is specifically on work that is in a data science context. And data science naturally has lots of interesting applications, like, for example, this educational attainment data set for the United States. So this plot shows you from the years 2009 to 2018, the attainment by race for all associate's degrees or higher. And so students have a programming task where they're trying to solve this problem, generate this plot from basically a CSV file. So if you click next, the interesting insight, I think, is that the actual data visualization library that we use called Pandas and Seaborn, Pandas formats the data in certain ways, depending on how your CSV is shaped. It turns out the data set from the National Center for Education Statistics provides the data in wide form, rather than the long form that Seaborn requires. So if you click next, you'll see kind of one of the big takeaways is that, well, if Seaborn requires long form data, then we have to additionally take a next step to be able to convert that wide form data to long form. And in summary, we can say that this approach requires kind of an understanding that certain libraries like Seaborn afford certain forms of data. And so it takes extra effort for data programmers and data scientists in my courses to be able to reflect on whether this is actually an effective plot. So if you click next, you'll see that there's a kind of preference for visualizations that are easier to produce. And if you go to the next slide, we'll see that that's not where I stop with this. That kind of represents the affordance analysis work. The interesting work that I think connects more closely to 3C is in this. So if you click next, you'll see these two plots are right next to each other. They're the same exact plot, except the titles are different. And I pose this as an opportunity for students to reflect on how the choice of titles might in turn cause us to create misleading or harmful conclusions, even if it's pointing out an important trend. So you see on the right plot, it says Asian educational attainment reaches new heights. That's a trend that data scientists may want to communicate. But there's also a lot of embedded assumptions or maybe misleading information in that trend that doesn't recognize, for example, model minority myth, or how, for example, Asian is not a monolith. And so I asked students to kind of reflect on what they might do about that. We learned that in data feminism that neutral titles have their own problem. You want to communicate some point. How do you do that in a way that is effective, that addresses these problems? And what I found is at the very end, so if we click next one more time, I've been able to kind of collate some of these student responses, share them with students, and I found that that's been a really insightful practice for us. So finally, if you click next, you can see more information on my course website, cs.uw.edu/163, or visit my homepage, kevinl.info, for more information about giving an invited talk on this.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brandon. I'm here with my co-instructor, Josh. We're from the University of Arizona. And we, as part of our deliverable, we piloted a one-credit discussion-based course based on cultural identity and computing engineering with a special focus on history. You can go to the next slide. So kind of some background on our department, right? The curriculum for computer science students is entirely technical. Like you're just going straight from learning how to program to learning how to do, all the kinds of things people in this room are very familiar with. And we wanted to kind of rectify this issue, and we decided to introduce a seminar course that was really focused on computing with a specific interest in history, identity, and the sort of context that brought students and the world to where it is today. And so we broke the course down into a couple of different parts, just as a little overview of the content. We started with a instructor-led section where each of the 4 instructors took on one topic of class, race, ability, and gender, and led a discussion based on some readings and some viewings, really focusing on both the history with computing as well as like the intersection. So for example, the interplay of class and gender at the outset of capitalism in the like 1700s. After we had that sort of baseline of historical information and kind of how we want to approach these topics, we sort of turned it over to the students. So the students got to select topics, select the readings that we would be doing, and then led the discussions as they saw us do. And some of the things we really wanted to focus on with these with this course was that we wanted to like use different types of content. So not just a bunch of readings, not just programming assignments, but like combining different sort of ways that people might want to consume information, which I think led to a really engaged student group who were really engaged in the conversations. And we took a lot from the pedagogy of the press, this idea of that we're all both students and teachers learning and teaching each other, which I think was really beneficial and like was really, I think, eye-opening for a lot of students that computing education could be this way. And we also incorporated at the end of the course a couple of different evaluation mechanisms. We had both the sort of standard course evaluations that you have in every class. We had the 3C fellowship collection, and we also invited a researcher in the education department to come in and do to lead a sort of synthesis discussion at the very end of the class to evaluate. So I'll pass it on to Josh to talk a little bit about the rest of the course.
Yeah, so if you look at kind of how we framed the outcomes for the course, with U of A, all of our syllabi have to list specifically what are the learning outcomes, and we've kind of listed them here. And I think they cover a lot of what Brandon talked about. Really wanted to cover some of the different readings and media that talk about historical context and focus specifically on identity characteristics like gender, race, class, and ability. We also wanted to really emphasize this notion of impact. I'll come back to that in my next slide, but actually with respect to impacts, I think we really wanted students to think a little bit outside of the box with respect to what are they doing when they learn these technological things and how do those actually play out with respect to impacts. We also wanted to focus and critique things that had to do with systematic oppression and talk about coded inequities in digital spaces and propose solutions. In practice, so what this means is that we were really trying to take concepts from the 3C Fellows program and figure out the right balance with integrating these in curriculum for students who were primarily at the undergraduate level. We also wanted to kind of change the notion of who is a computing professional and talk a little bit about how every individual has a role in shaping that community. So we can move on to the next slide. We thought it'd be helpful, since we only had 5 minutes, to kind of talk a little bit about a few different aspects of the course. One of these is how we got the course to deploy. It turns out that we had to navigate quite a bit with respect to the undergraduate curriculum at U of A to both make this a course that students would be interested in taking, but also make this a course that our faculty would understand, hey, it fits into the degree program. We got very lucky. Our undergraduate curriculum committee was supportive of doing this, and actually this helped us in a more general way. We fundamentally created a mechanism for undergraduate seminars, which had not really existed in our degree program prior to that. A couple tips for running a course like this. We really wanted to make sure the course was easy to get into, so that's why we made it a 1-credit course. It was graded pass-fail, things like that. We also wanted to make it a course that students were interested in taking, so we had to think a little bit about who would take this course and what would be their reasons to jump in. And also make sure that we brought a diverse set of perspectives. That played out with respect to the fact that we had 4 different instructors, and then you can see a picture of the class. We had approximately 10 students in the class, but we did a good job of, I think, balancing different viewpoints along the way. In terms of student reactions, we had a lot of different evaluation mechanisms, as Brandon said, but I want to point out kind of just 3 big issues from that, or three big outcomes that came from that. So one is the students frequently mentioned the notion of impact in terms of impact of studying and talking about this material, to the tune of they said things like, I would go home and have conversations with my friends or talk about this with my family in terms of where bias is playing out in the technology we worked with. We looked at this as a huge positive. We also talked a little bit about how people's perspectives had evolved and changed throughout this. There were a couple places where this became a little bit interesting. So one student mentioned something to the tune of, if you're going to take a course like this, you have to be prepared to resist the paralysis of hopelessness. Because we did talk about a number of sensitive issues, and we did try to calibrate here, I think, in a good way, so that students were open-minded about, well, there are challenges with how things are currently, and what can we do to kind of address those challenges. One other final thing I want to mention is the structure of the course, because it was a small scale seminar. It had some positives and negatives. One of the things that we put a lot of energy into thinking about was making sure that students had enough space to talk and think comfortably with things. A couple students mentioned things like, well, it took me a little bit of time to warm up, but once we kind of deployed the course in a way that basically balanced who was giving the instruction, who was a student versus who was a teacher, I think that ended up working really well in our setting. All right, thank you all.
Hello, everyone. My name is Raghav Sampangi, and I'm joining you with Gabriela Mosquera. We are the Ready Group. We are joining you from Mi'kma'ki, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, and it's also known as Halifax in Nova Scotia, Canada. Next slide, please. Thank you. So a bit about us. We started as an interest in action group with its hub here at Dalhousie University in Canada. A couple of years ago, actually, just as we started our cohort 2 at 3C. Basically, we were focused on creating a community level change amongst the peers and amongst us as colleagues, to try to build that culture of inclusion and culture of kindness within our unit. We recognize fully that we are works in progress, and there are lessons that we learn on a daily basis through interactions with various individuals and through interactions with the various aspects of our system. And we try to incorporate that into our ongoing learning, reflection, and practice. Next slide, please. So as part of the work that we've been doing throughout our involvement with the 3C Fellowship, and one of the main deliverables was this document called the Ready Recommendations. Essentially, this document is a collection of recommendations to incorporate inclusive practices in our courses, in our course designs. We call this a living document. So anytime we learn something new, or anytime there is a change that requires us to include something else as part of the recommendations, we go ahead and we do so. And I think the last update was sometime last year, when we learned about a suggestion to incorporate one of the questions within our recommendations. So if any one of you has any suggestions for including aspects in our Ready recommendations, please let us know. Again, this is an ongoing collaborative update cycle. So this was one of the main outcomes, or rather work that we committed to throughout our 3C Fellowship. Following our 3C Fellowship completion, which was, I think, a year or so ago, we've been continuing our work within our community to promote, one, these recommendations, as well as just in general, the idea of incorporating more inclusive practices within our computing courses. We presented two papers within our Dalhousie University's conference on university teaching and learning last year, and both of them actually led to potentials for collaborations with another faculty within our university, the Faculty of Science. So that's the outreach and partnerships that you see on the right-hand side over there. We are currently co-leading an inclusive STEM teaching community of practice with the Faculty of Science faculty members. And we are going to host a couple of those sessions based on the themes that we've identified within the Ready recommendations sometime in the spring of this year. And those presentations also actually led us to begin more conversations with colleagues across different universities. And those conversations are still ongoing. And that's something that we look forward to continue this year. And as part of my sabbatical last year, one of the work that I did was develop a new course called Inclusive Computing. which focuses mainly on three main elements: the foundations of aspects of inclusion and exclusion and computing, and then inclusive UI and UX design, and of course, considerations for developing inclusive systems and applications, which tries to bring in aspects of decolonization and inclusion and belonging as well. And Gabriella is working on a web accessibility course, which is also something that we're working on. On to you, Gabriella. Over to you. Thanks.
So as part of the work that we've done, obviously there's lots of things that we've learned, because part of what we try to do is essentially we're dealing more with faculty members as a way of changing the way that we teach, or at least changing how we think about what we're teaching. So in terms of lessons learned, we recognize that there's systemic barriers and hesitation to change, and we've run across them, unfortunately, within our department. Which is part of the reason why we started sort of branching out to make sure that the work keeps going, and then maybe by creating more of a word of mouth to be able to come back into the faculty and then have more of an impact that way, which is how we started the community of practice between the Faculty of Computer Science and the Faculty of Science. So we're really looking forward to kicking off those sessions. And then also the sessions that we have, who speaks and on what we speak on for those sessions, and particularly when we have workshops for faculty member, holding those sessions matters, but also the topic and also who carries on the topic. We've had situations in which, unfortunately, we've had non-BIPOC members kind of disrupt the safe space that people are in. And, at those times, it's always kind of been this thing where we realize the importance of continuing to hold the sessions and also continuing to make sure that the space is a safe space and a comfortable space for those who do want to be involved in the work to continue to be involved in the work. So far, again, we've kept on rallying on, so it's been working. In terms of what we're aiming to do, as far as our themes for ongoing work, like Raghav mentioned, we have ready sessions on EDIA, and these are different topics that we try to start a conversation with faculty members, just to consider how we're teaching, what we're teaching, whether there's any biases that we're passing on to students or that we're reinforcing in some way that maybe need to change. We've also had joint sessions with Core CS, which is the EDIA committee within the faculty. So that committee has become more active thanks to that as well. And as Raghav mentioned, we have his work on the inclusive computing course design, hopefully a course that does go through the approval process, probably this semester, if not in the summer, for becoming an undergraduate course. And then I'm finishing up the proposal for the accessible web development course, which what I'm hoping to do with that is getting students to understand that accessibility is not really an option, and to really experience the web in a different way so that we become more empathetic with our development practice. And finally, to continuing on with the communities of practice, not just within the university, across different faculties, but also between our university and other universities within the province to start with. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Carl Wurst at Worcester State University, and I'm here with my colleagues Nada Al-Salami and Ali Al-Faris. And we just figured we'd mention a little bit about Worcester State University at the beginning of this so that you have an idea of what our students are like. We're a public university in central Massachusetts, about 1 hour west of Boston. We're the second largest city in New England, and we are what Massachusetts calls a gateway city, where we have below average household income and rate of bachelor's degree attainment. And so we have a very diverse immigrant population for many of our students. We have about 6,000 students, 4,000 undergraduates. Our CS department has 300 CS majors and minors and 5 full-time faculty. And 3 of us are currently in the 3C program. There may be others involved in the program in the future. So my activity, so the activities that we all worked on were for individual class activities. We're thinking about trying to do something larger across the department, but right now it's in individual classes. So I'm teaching a course or I was teaching a course last semester in software process management. So it's about team process and how teams work together to develop systems. And this is something that's taken by all CS majors. We had talked earlier in the semester about using linters on code. So using tools that looked at code for style and structure and so on. And I was using in my own documentation and things that I was writing a linting tool that had been developed for looking for non-inclusive language in documentation called AiiCE. And so I thought it might be an interesting thing to go and bring that into the class, because we had talked about doing this for code, that we should do this for documentation as well. And I had an introduction that I gave to this particular activity where I said that computing as a field has a continuing problem with inclusion and diversity, and that many people with identities that are not white, cisgender, heterosexual, neurotypical, non-disabled, Christian, young, and man may not feel welcome and included in the field. And talked about how the fact that this is going to be a problem with having software that works well for everybody. And one of the places where people first come in contact with these sorts of projects is the documentation for a project. And so if we could be careful about our documentation, then we would have people not deciding not to join the community working on the software in the first place and feeling like they were welcome and included and that we valued their contributions for the project. So what we did in this was I had groups of students. Groups of students were 4 student groups. We had been working in these groups all semester, so they were relatively comfortable with each other by this point, which helped a lot with the activity. And I had them take a large block of documentation and run this linter on that particular documentation. And what it does is it flags words that are problematic for various reasons. And I asked them to discuss these because we talked about the fact that, if you were running, say, a grammar checker in Word, it often gets wrong whether something is actually a grammatical problem or not. And the same thing happens here. Certain words are problematic based on context or not. And so I wanted them to discuss when they saw words that were flagged here, whether this was a problem or not, and discuss within their groups why this would be flagged as a problem. And then if they decided that this is something that really needed to be changed, that how they would rewrite it, first of all, and do that as a group. But then possibly more importantly, think about how they would ask the original author of the documentation to make that change without feeling like they were being attacked for what they had written. So, how could you explain to somebody why what they had written is going to be an issue for some people that they may be interested in having join their project? And since a large portion of what we focus on is open source projects, how would you do this as an issue that you put into the project, asking maintainers to make this kind of change? So we did this as groups through one class time. I had links to a number of guides on writing for inclusive language from various sources that they could use as references to decide whether this was something that they should change and how they should talk about it or not. So I do have a link to the activity there. It's on my GitLab page for the course. If anybody would like to use it, you're welcome to do so. It is licensed Creative Commons, CC BY, and the one problem that you may find with this is you've got to find something that you're willing to use with this for your students. The corpus that I use for this is not something that I feel comfortable making public because it's not something that I have permission from the original author to use for this, even though it is public. and I don't want to put it out there as something that they would feel I was saying that their writing might be a problem. Okay. But the students seem to do well with the activity, apart from some early giggling and so on from groups when they came upon terms that they were uncomfortable with. But it worked pretty well, and the survey results at the end from the 3C assessment, pretty much everybody said that they felt more comfortable talking about these kinds of topics. One student said they felt less comfortable, which actually may be a positive. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how to interpret that particular one. All right, so on to Ali next. Oh, sorry, Nada.
Okay, hi everyone. So I use my class. My class is algorithm analysis. Actually, a junior level student, and some of them are senior, take this class. So it is a class actually taken by all computer science major. So I did my activity during one class. Unfortunately, there was no time, but I'm planning to do that for more than one class. The goal of my assignment is to get the student to understand the meaning behind algorithm bias, how to detect and also how to avoid algorithm bias, and work with some example related to algorithm bias in computer science in general. So you might know about algorithm analysis class. So algorithm analysis is an important part of computational complexity theory. Students learn different strategy and different strategy for designing and analyzing algorithms. Students also learn about the limitation of computing in general. So the term algorithm bias describes systematic and repeatable error that create unfair outcomes. So it's really affect a lot of algorithms. So some of artificial intelligent algorithm makes decisions that are systematically unfair to certain group of people. Several studies have identified the potential of these bias to cause like a real harm. A lot of studies and research published there. So the idea behind my activity actually, first of all, the student worked in groups. So I'm asking the student to select a partner, at least 3 or something, like depending on, we have 24 students as a maximum number of students. And first of all, they are required to read the information related to algorithm bias from some posted links. So I spent some time to select some of these articles or discussion logs, something like this. And I also give my student the opportunity to select another article if they thought it's help to understand this topic. Then the students were required to answer some question related to this topic, and encouraged to discuss their experience and idea with their classmates. So like in between the group itself and between groups. Some of these questions, some of them, not all of them, but like this question, can algorithm bias be completely eliminated? And why addressing algorithm bias is so difficult, specifically for artificial intelligent algorithm. And we have, during the fall semester, we have studied a lot of different algorithms. So I asked the student which one they think might be or might have a bias and why they think they have a bias. So give one idea, and also the student were asked to give at least one idea to reduce this bias. And also there was an interesting question related to this topic, like if it's possible to reduce the potential risk of bias algorithm to your community. A lot of answer, a lot of reflection was there. So I can say the result of this activity, the majority of the students mentioned in their discussion log and also during the class that the topic itself is really interesting. Some of them know nothing about algorithm bias, like one or more students say like, is that for real? I thought all algorithms are correct and there is no way to have like unfair output. So actually the discussion was really interesting, and we spent a lot of time for discussion log, and those are submitted by using like electronic submission link. Okay, thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ali Al-Faris, Worcester State University. Same as what my colleagues did in their courses, we agreed on implementing at least one activity in our different courses. So the course that I taught last semester was first year seminar game design, which is a course offered to students from different disciplines, but the majority of the students were from computer science with some students from other disciplines. The course itself is transition to learn how to transition from school to college and learn about the environment and the university requirements, but also to focus on a specific CS topic, which was the game design. The activity that I did, we spent like 3 classes to complete this activity. I started the activity by discussing in slides and the importance of EDI in games. And based on some of the research reports, studies, we figured out with the students how the EDI is in game design and in games in general for the past 20 years. And we found out how the lack of representation is a pattern in a lot of games, that some of these games are famous or are popular. We had a discussion about the results from these studies and good conversation, and students share their ideas as well. Following that, I assigned an assignment or project assignment for students. In this assignment, I asked students to pick any game that they want to study. The game could be a mobile game, a computer game, or even a board game. A game that they have played before. And then to create slide presentation for the following class on analyzing this game. The first thing is to describe the game and give a bit of summary of the game elements, and this is related to the game design topics that we covered during the course. But the second part of the presentation is the important one, where I ask students to review the EDI in the chosen game and what they think about the EDI in the game based on the game theme, the story, the characters, the experience, the locations, the setting, the emotions, all of these, how the EDI were represented in the chosen game. And then after they discuss these concepts, the third requirement in this assignment was assuming that they can contact the designers of the game, what they can suggest to the designers to enhance the EDI in their game, what recommendations that they can give to the designers to improve the EDI in the game. The activity was very interesting because we took like 2 weeks to complete the activity. So we had a lot of discussions ending with the presentations from the students. I had about 20 students, so we had 20 presentations. over 2 classes, 5 to 7 minutes for each student. They presented the games that they played for years, but some of them they never really realized that some of these games are really not paying attention to a lot of important things regarding EDI. We had a discussion after each of these presentations. Some of these games were played by other students, so there was a good conversation and discussion about it. And very interesting ideas came from the students. I remember one of them, like about chess, for example. So the student was saying, okay, most of the time we see chess in black and white. Why is that? Raises questions. And some of the pieces in chess maybe represent specific themes in real life, while chess is like international game, like why bishop, for example, why queen, why king. And then they suggested different design for chess where they use a lot of different colors and different representations for the pieces. It was very interesting. And same goes to other popular video games like GTA, Overwatch, and other thing, Call for Duty, where they discuss the characters. And one of the discussions was about when the game designers pick a different country and they use all of the stereotyping materials in the game. So picking a Asian country or African country, and they throw all of the stereotyping stories there, which may not represent the real life in that country. So they give really nice suggestions. Also, they talked a lot about customization in games and how game designers can improve the customization for characters, locations, where players can really redesign their characters to be based on their personalities and background. So we had a lot of discussions. I think even for me, I found it very interesting about a lot of games that I played or I know about, but when we discussed the details, we learned more how we can improve that. And this gave a good perspective for students when they design their games, what they have to care about in this matter. Yeah, thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you all so much for sharing. Round of applause for all of the hard work. Everything ranging from activities implemented in class to thinking about working with students and teachers. We have a few minutes left for questions, but I want to make sure we have some sort of small discussion. And I saw Rudy's question in the chat, and I want to give an opportunity for us to talk about this notion of change, right? And much of this work that you all are doing and that we're all invested in is this idea of transformation. And I know that the University of Arizona group talked about a little bit. Josh, you mentioned it, seeing change happen in your students and this idea of impact. But I wanted to open the floor specifically for the folks in the student-facing groups, right? People who are working directly with students, right? How have you seen change manifest in the work in yourself or even directly in your students? And I'll let, maybe, does anyone want to volunteer to go first? Those who are doing student-facing work? Let's start with Kevin.
Yeah, navigating change. I think that's been up and down for me. It's also been like a learning process for myself to find ways to thread the needle. I think in my own place, I'm in a computer science department unit, and one of the big questions for us is like, is this computer science? There's quite a bit of gatekeeping in terms of like, where does that line fall? For me, I've navigated it in the work I showed you, where it's like, it's in the moment of these technical decisions that you're making that some of these questions start to surface. And I think by engaging those questions in the technical decision-making process, you really can't argue against it being part of computer science.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And on the other side of that, those who are working in teacher training, can you talk a little bit about challenges, barriers, either within yourself that you face within your department or broader CS or departmental community? And I want to point to the Ready group to answer this question. I believe Rudy posed this question specifically to you all in thinking about computer science and scientists, communities of practice. What sorts of barriers did you all face in implementation?
That's a very good question. One of the, I mean, the the first thing that comes to mind is the varied reactions that we got. Wholesale acceptance and support on the one hand, and a lot of restrictions and constraints, active prevention on the other hand. So that was that was the first thing that came to mind when I saw the question. And it's like there's a lot that does happen, and we had a couple of sessions last year when we had discussions about identity and positionality and privilege and intersectionality. And there were interactions that followed, and then background interactions with none of us being involved in the situation, but then the consequences of those background discussions being imposed on us as restrictions or barriers, preventing us from actually continuing the work. In fact, one of the instructions that came after a couple of those discussions was to cease doing those discussions for now. So yeah, it did happen, but also one of the things that we had to do was to take a step back and just reflect on the experience that we went through, hold space for each of us and both of us, and take some time to reevaluate what is it that we really wanted to do. And one of our collaborators keeps saying, keep your eye on the prize. And, that's really what we kept thinking about. And it also connects back to a lot of the lessons that we learned through the 3C fellowship. So we had to take a step back, reevaluate, and start investing our energy into communities of practice, so that we can be there for each other, and we can be there in, the communities of teachers can collectively work on introducing and, well, implementing lasting change.
Thank you so much.
One thing that
Yes,
I'll
go
add
ahead.
to what Raghav mentioned is one of the other pieces of barriers that we've gotten as well in terms of carrying on the work as well. One of the most, I would say, most common responses that we got to kind of create those barriers was, we don't know the training you've done, so we don't know whether you're able to do this or not. So then that was one of the things that we realized, that rather than it being used as, let's start the conversation, that was actually being used as an excuse to say, because I don't know it, then you can't do it, does not mean I want to know what you did. It's just, you shouldn't do it because I don't know what it is. So then we started changing our strategy to that community of practice. Let's create a group of people that start the conversation, and let's start talking about what different opportunities for training, for implementing strategies, and also for everybody to see what everybody else is doing, and then use that as word of mouth so that people become more aware of options that are out there, and at the end of the day, how they impact and can benefit the students.
Thank you all so much. And once again, being mindful of time, and this hour literally flew by. But there is one more question that I think each of you all could answer. And let's do it this way. So think of a 3 to 5 word response for this. What is one way that you would describe the 3C Fellows program if you're framing it as advice for someone considering applying to the program? How would you describe it in 3 to 5 words, framing it as advice to someone who's considering to apply?
I would say eye-opening.
I would say, kind of tying into the idea of reimagination, it's about questioning our work.
I think that it's serious, and you need to take it seriously as a commitment.
I would probably add like something like totally worth it, or just do it, or something like that. Like it was for me extremely life-changing.
I think as a PhD student, it was really about finding community. and other PhD students that were thinking about the same questions.
I would say that what it covers and what it does is really essential for us.
I would say it's a great way to be a part of what's coming in our field. And if you're in a position to impact and work with teachers, other educators, and even if you're teaching classes yourself, it's a great way to start engaging if you haven't done it yet.
It's a wonderful way, I think, to work towards that sense of belonging that we all look forward to.
It's also inspiring because as part of the program, you start to learn, like I said, what everybody else is working on, what their motivations are. So then, like Rudy said, the work is not easy. So understanding that you have a group of peers that are going through the same thing, it's almost like you feel like you have a team that's rooting for you along the way, if that makes sense.
For us, it inspired us to start and continue discussing and talking about these important things that sometimes we forget to talk about them in computer science because it's technology, but it's really important, especially attending all of these sessions. It helped us to talk more and to discuss more with our students.
Yeah, I agree also, because sometimes we're focusing on how to solve the problem itself. We forget about this important tool. We are teaching a lot of students and the student with different backgrounds. So we have to keep attention to all these details. So I believe it's really important to continue working with these tools.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our attendees who joined this session. It's been a fantastic conversation, so great learning from you all. Do not forget, mark your calendars for our next session on March 19th at 5 p.m. thinking about what's DEIA got to do with ABET. So the registration for that is in the link. You all have a fantastic rest of your day. Once again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to AiiCE. Thank you to Dr. Washington and Dr. Daly for organizing this space. And we will see you all soon. Take care, everyone.